אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה. לא במבצע, לא בסבבים, במלחמה.
On October 7, 2023, a Palestinian group named Hamas launched an attack on Israel, with its fighters entering communities near the Gaza Strip, killing residents and taking dozens of hostages. Israel then launched a counterattack, where 500 Palestinians had lost their lives as of the time of this recording on October 9, 2023. A lot of people don't know that these two states have been in constant conflicts, fighting for over 75 years. So as to understand these states better today, we need to go back in history where it all begun. Back in 1481, there was a great empire started known as the Ottoman Empire or the Turkish Empire. The empire grew its territories, controlling some European nations in 16th century, and by the fall of the empire in 1914, some Middle Eastern countries including Palestine were still under it. Before its fall, there was the First World War that started in 1914, and the Turks sided with the Germans, Austria, Hungary, and Bulgaria against Serbia, Russia, France, Britain, Italy, and the United States. So as to weaken the Germans' end to protect their interests, the British government saw it fit to overthrow the Ottoman Empire, and to do this, they needed a country that was still under the Turks' rule to fight for them. So the British approached Palestine and they promised them independence from the Ottoman Empire and that they will rule themselves as an Arab country. Palestine leaders agreed, and they contributed to the fall of the Ottoman Empire in 1918 by going to war. During the war, Palestine leaders at the time did not know that the British had made another promise to a different group of people, which will lead to conflicts in their homeland for decades to come. Before World War I, the Arabs in Palestine, together with the few Christians and Jews living there, were at peace with each other in the same land. Also before the First World War, in the late 19th century, Zionists sought to establish a homeland for the Jewish people in Turks-controlled Palestine. Zionism initially emerged in Central and Eastern Europe as a national revival movement in the late 19th century, both in reaction to newer waves of anti-Semitism and as a response to Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment. Theodor Herzl was the father of modern political Zionism, who envisioned the founding of a future independent Jewish state during the 20th century. Zionists increasingly came to hold that the state of Palestine should be their historic homeland, which they referred to as the Land of Israel. As the First World War went on, the Russians broke their alliance with British and France because it was ill-equipped to fight a major war due to lack of funds and food shortages to feed its people. Now that the Russians had pulled out of the war, British and the French needed America to join the war on their side, or they would lose to Germany and its allies. It was during this time that the British came to learn about the nationalist Jewish movement in Russia that had a lot of followers and were in support of Bolshevik revolution in Russia, who was against the British. The British went into negotiations with the Zionists when the World War I was in stalemate about the wishes of the Jewish people to establish their home country in Palestine, so to lessen the support of Bolshevik back in Russia, and to also have a nationalist movement in the Arab world. On 31st October 1917, both sides reached an agreement and the Balfour Declaration was made, which stated, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country." The opening words of the declaration represented the first public expression of support for Zionism by a major political power. After the declaration, the Zionists started their move to Palestine, but the intended boundaries of Palestine were not specified in the declaration. Between 1919 and 1926, 90,000 immigrants arrived in Palestine because of the anti-Semitic manifestations, such as the pogroms in Ukraine, in which 100,000 Jews were killed. The immigrant Jews were received by the Zionists who had bought land in Palestine during the Ottoman Empire days, but their numbers grew and more land was needed. In some cases, a large acquisition of lands, from absentee landlords, led to the replacement of the tenant farmers with European Jewish settlers, causing Palestinian Arabs to feel dispossessed. The Arab population in Palestine opposed the increase of the Jewish population because the new immigrants refused to lease or sell land to Palestinians or hire them for work. During the 1920s, when the First World War had ended a few years back, relations between the Jewish and Arab populations deteriorated and the hostility between the two groups intensified. By 1939, there was an Arab revolt in Palestine in which Palestinian Arabs rioted and murdered Jews in various cities. This revolt lasted up to 1939. In 1936, the British still occupied Palestine under the Palestine Mandate, and they wanted to settle the riots, and they formed a committee which was to come up with a plan which would be accepted by both sides. The committee came up with the Peel Commission of 1937, which proposed a two-state solution to the conflict, whereby Palestine would be divided into two states, one Arab state and one Jewish state. The Jewish state would include the coastal plain, Jezreel Valley, Beit Shean and the Galilee, while the Arab state would include Transjordan, Judea and Samaria, the Jordan Valley, and the Negev. The Arabs opposed the partition plan and condemned it unanimously, the idea of a Jewish state, and called for an independent state of Palestine, which they had been promised by the British government before joining the war to defeat the Ottoman Empire. They also demanded the stop of all Jewish immigration plus land taking and purchase of Palestinian lands. The Zionist Jews, on the other hand, were divided over the Peel Partition Commission's plan, and they later boycotted the commission altogether. With the failed commission plan, the Palestinian Arab revolt lasted for a few years. Now let's move into World War II, which happened between 1941 to 1945. During the Second World War, the highest levels of the German government officials supported their President Adolf Hitler to murder all Jews throughout Europe. Victims were deported by rail to extermination camps, where, if they survived the journey, most were killed with poison gas. Other Jews continued to be employed in forced labor camps, where many died from starvation, abuse or exhaustion, or used as test subjects in deadly medical experiments. When Germans were committing the Holocaust of over 6 million Jews, other Jews were fortunate to escape by fleeing to Palestine. This made the Jewish population in Palestine to more than double. While the World War II was happening, things in Palestine were very tense. The British had yet not solved the issues between the Arabs and Jews in Palestine. Also, the Jews who were coming in from Europe had better military weapons and experience as they had fought in the World War, so this also increased the tension in the area. After the World War II ended, a Jewish resistance movement was formed due to the British policies they were against. By 1947, United Nations was newly formed and a committee was elected to solve the issue of Palestine. In the same year, on November 29, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 181, also known as the Partition Resolution, that would divide Great Britain's former Palestinian Mandate into Jewish and Arab states in May 1948. Under the resolution, the area of religious significance surrounding Jerusalem would remain under international control, administered by the United Nations. The Palestinian Arabs refused to recognize this arrangement, which they regarded as favorable to the Jews and unfair to the Arab population that would remain in Jewish territory under the partition. The United Nations resolution sparked conflict between Jewish and Arab groups within Palestine, but after the Jews declared an independent state named Israel in 1948, the fighting intensified, with other Arab countries' forces joining the Palestinian Arabs in attacking the Israel territory. This is when the British started to withdraw from the area and they left the United Nations to solve the conflict between the two states. And that's how the Palestine and Israel conflict started. And the United Nations has never been able to solve it, making both Jews and Arabs to lose their lives and properties over the years. Palestine has been losing a lot of territory to the Israel state over time, and USA President Donald Trump made Jerusalem the capital of Israel 5 years ago.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
A move which a lot of Palestinians did not approve of, since Jerusalem was supposed to be a neutral city for both states. Since its declaration as an independent state, Israel has been receiving both financial and military support from big governments in the world, and also support from citizens in different countries.
At the Middle East, I think it's about time we stop those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
It's nasty. It's heartbreaking. It's absolute heartbreaking. My support is 1,000% with Israel.
Shalom everyone. My name is Samuel Kyle and I'm a Kenyan. We stand with you, Israel, in this difficult time. Israel is a God-chosen nation. I know that you will conquer the terrorists and all the enemy. We love you all and we stand with you, Israel.
In the past few years, though, there has been a growing support of Palestine from the citizens of big governments and also other citizens in the world, especially after videos started surfacing about the apartheid regime over Palestine imposed by Israel.
This is Fadl, who has lived in this home his whole life. In the 1980s, Israel set up this checkpoint in front of his house. Fadl now has to check in every time he leaves or enters his own home. كيف بتضايقوا عليكم؟
زي ما انت شايفه بخلوش قرايبنا يجوا علينا.
حترى
يعني بنتي متجوزه مين مسموح لها تيجي جوزها لا.
واو. وهلا لما بتمرق ايش لازم تفرجيه؟
اسمه ورقم هويتي.
وانت بتقدر تمشي
لا.
هون مش ممنوع؟
بس لحديتهم.
واو.
هون ممنوع.
شو بيطلع عليه بنشوف هي الشيء ولا واحد منهم مبسوط ولا واحد معاه شيء كده.
Here they line up single file to be filtered through checkpoints and authorized entry to work in land that they consider as occupied by Israel.
Jacob, you know this is not your house.
Yes, but if I go, you don't go back. So what's the problem? Why are you yelling at me? I didn't do this. I didn't do this.
But
it's easy to yell at me, but I didn't do this.
Yeah, you are stealing my house.
And if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it.
No one is allowed to steal it, يا عمي.
From Brooklyn?
No, I'm from New York, from Long Island.
From New York. What right do you have to live here?
The right I have is that the owner of the house wants me to live here, and he wants there to be Jews living in this house, and he wants to, and I got chosen for whatever reason. It ended up being me.
So why do you live here?
Because I live here, because it's important, and because not too many people want to live here, and it's important to strengthen this neighborhood, to make sure that this neighborhood is not lost in any future peace deal.
So your position here is a political position to keep Palestinians out of it?
Not to keep Palestinians out of it, to keep Jews in it.
And therefore keep the Palestinians who are here out of it?
No, that's not, no. That's a necessary evil. And they're not coming back into here. So whether I am here, whether I am not here, whether it's me, whether it's someone else, whether it's a monkey, whether it's a giraffe, they're not coming back into this house ever. I understand why they're angry at me. I understand why they dislike me. But I did not do this to them. I'm not doing this to them. And as I said, if I leave, I'll be replaced immediately. And I venture to think that whoever comes here is not going to be as easygoing as I am.
Jerusalem this week, an act of religious hatred, igniting a scandal in Israel and beyond. Other videos, also widely seen on social media, show Jews spitting toward nuns outside a church. And yet another where Jews spit at a church doorway. Israeli police say they have arrested 5 people, one a minor, in the latest incident.
Here are some videos of people showing their support of Palestine, including some Jews.
South connection to 1C, track 110 on the lower left. Attention, Hudson Line.
As an Orthodox Jew and a Zionist, on a shelf in our kitchen was a tin box of the Jewish National Fund, into which we put coins to help the pioneers building a Jewish presence in Palestine. I first went to Israel in 1961, and I've been there since more times than I can count. I had family in Israel, and I have friends in Israel. One of them fought in the wars of 1956, 1967, and 1973, and was wounded in 2 of them. The tie clip which I'm wearing is made from a campaign decoration awarded to him, which he presented to me. I've known most of the prime ministers of Israel, starting with the founding prime minister, David Ben-Gurion. Golda Meir was my friend. So was Yigal Allon, the Deputy Prime Minister, who as a general won the Negev for Israel in the 1948 War of Independence. My parents came to Britain as refugees from Poland. Most of their families were subsequently murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. My grandmother was ill in bed when the Nazis came to her hometown of Stachov. A German soldier shot her dead in her bed. Madam Deputy Speaker, my grandmother did not die to provide cover for Israeli soldiers murdering Palestinian grandmothers in Gaza. The present Israeli government ruthlessly and cynically exploit the continuing guilt among Gentiles over the slaughter of Jews in the Holocaust as justification for their murder of Palestinians. The implication is that Jewish lives are precious, but the lives of Palestinians do not count.
I seriously suggest now that what's happening in Israel and Palestine is not apartheid is shocking to me. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen the apartheid wall in Jerusalem. I was in Ramallah. I travelled to Hebron. I've seen what happened in Hebron, where that city and community are devastated to protect hundreds of settlers, illegal settlers. It's a damning indictment in our country that in the 1980s we led the way confronting the South African apartheid regime, yet today we can't even pass legislation that bans illegal settler goods. These settlements are illegal under international law, yet we do commerce with those who are responsible for that repugnant situation. We can't even do that. We can't even pass that law in this country. We can't recognise the Palestinian state.
History will judge those who sit on the fence, and history will shame those who bury their heads in the sand while the Palestinian people continue to suffer at the hands of an oppressive, brutal, occupying apartheid state that is Israel. Minister, you must act. You cannot afford to sit on your hands and not act. You must call Israel out for the apartheid policies and the apartheid regime in which they use against the Palestinian people.
Clear. Israel has a right to exist and to defend itself. That is an indisputable fact. But so do Palestinians, and that's a fact that's often ignored. Palestinians are, at best, third-class citizens in the nation of their birth. The idea that it's even remotely controversial to call what Israel has imposed on Palestinians a form of apartheid is laughable. One look at a current map of Israel, Gaza, and the occupied territories conjures up only one other example: apartheid-era South Africa. The Israeli government, on an ongoing basis, declares parcels of land on which Palestinians live to be either of military or archaeological importance, causing residents to be evicted. Sometimes there's a court case, and almost always the Palestinians lose. Yet months or weeks later, that same important land suddenly becomes home to a brand new Israeli settlement. As more and more Jewish settlers take over land on which Arabs live, the occupied West Bank becomes de facto more Israeli and, in the explicit hopes of the Israeli government, more Jewish. This is a long-standing attempt and a deliberate attempt to force Arabs who have lived in that land, sometimes for hundreds of years, out. It's an attempt to dilute their presence, because to have Arabs as full participants is, in the opinion of the Israeli government and their courts, diluting Israel.
We have come to the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. And no matter what side you support, let's hope and pray that peace will eventually prevail, not only in that region, but in the world as a whole.